Hello, this is Don Milne. I'm making this recording called Completing the Arlington National Cemetery World War II Fallen Database, and it's meant for those people who are working at the writer stage of the project. And here it is being recorded first part of February. Ideally, it would have been recorded in early January, late December. So some of you will be looking at this and saying, well, I wish I would have had this a month ago. But going forward, it should be helpful. The reason I'm making this particular video is we want to create the best Arlington National Cemetery. The reason for this video is we want to create the best Arlington National Cemetery World War II Fallen database. As other information I have shared has indicated, we started out with a very limited and very incomplete database. We want to return this database to Arlington National Cemetery, but this final database we want to be rich and a complete record of the World War II fallen buried there at Arlington. We think that this database can be used by others to expand on what we've done and use it for other purposes, researching, highlights, etc. One caveat here that I've added at the end is hopefully we can make this database as accurate as possible. If we return, obviously no database can be 100% accurate, but if we return a database with lots of errors, eventually they're going to say, well, there's too many mistakes for this to be useful, so we're just not going to use it. So it sets a little bit of a high bar for us to do that. A side note to those people that have worked on our databases in the past, before now it's pretty much been an internal document. We just use it to track which names have been assigned out and which have not been. But this one's kind of unique, so we want to be able to have a nice database to return back to Arlington. We may end up removing some of the columns that we're using for research purposes, but we'd like to have a pretty clean and accurate spreadsheet to return to them. We did do something similar for the D-Day project. We took the basic information that we received from the National D-Day Memorial, and after we were done, we returned them a database that was much more complete than what we started with. Phase 1 of the Arlington National Cemetery project is where we took that basic information we got from Arlington, augmented it with some information from Find a Grave, and then we had a research crew taking on average probably 2 to 5 minutes to create the basic information for each record. So now that we're on phase 2, this is going to involve the writers, and they should be taking 2 to 8 hours, sometimes even more, to research and write about the name that they get from the database. So while we're in phase 2, as it applies to the database that you're using, we're hoping that the writers can correct any information as needed, add missing information, and then add some new information in some phase 2 columns that I've added. So what do I mean by correcting any information? Remember that the database that you got, part of the records came from Arlington or Find a Grave, but most of the added detail came from an individual who was taking 2 to 5 minutes to find information to fill it out. We're hoping that most of the information they provided is accurate, but there's going to be some mistakes that crop up now and then. So if you can make corrections on the database as you find them, so it's more accurate after your review, you've had more time to dive into that particular person's information, you can correct that information. The second thing is sometimes because our researchers are only supposed to do 2 to 5 minutes per name and they don't look at all the different places that you do for information, they may not have the details. So if you see some cells that are empty, go ahead and fill those out. Then the last thing I want to mention is there's some new columns that the phase 1 researchers did not even have. These involve a grave type, Together We Serve honor roll, URL, a home address, Congressional District, and NARA roll. So I'm going to go through a sample page to kind of go through these things so you can kind of see it as it's being applied to a database. So I selected a copy I have of the Watchtower East database. There may be some work that's been done on it since I had this version, but I'm just using this as a reference purpose. So when this was first handed out, most of the birth dates were not there, but now they are. And so if you're doing research and you find out somewhere along the line a birth date got put in wrong, then you would correct that. We have death locations. On this Robert Savoy, it's a question mark. The person did the research didn't know where he died. If you know that, you can add that information here. So that's what we're looking to when we say correct information or add information that is not there. Notes of interest, I'm going to talk about this on a different page. Here we have someone that doesn't have a service number. So if the researcher was unable to find the service number, hopefully with more time you are able to get that information and you can add it there. So that's kind of what we're looking for. This information, mostly filled out by the researcher. As you get a name, you can go through and see if that's accurate or if it needs to be corrected. Over in the unit or ship, you may be able to drill down to a deeper level than the individual who did the research. So that would be something you might be able to change there. So any information that you find that you can add, that would be great. And here you see the state on the gravestone. This is because this is the first operation we did, and this column wasn't even there to begin with. So we want to have the state from the gravestone added here, and then the birth city and county and state here. It may not be the same. Sometimes people join the military from a different location, and that's going to be the state that is usually listed on the gravestone. So we're looking to get that information from the writers if the researchers don't have it already. So the fold 3 story, originally that's going to show a no, but eventually as those get completed, the director will actually add the fold 3 URL for that. Now let's talk about the information that's being added only for the writers to see. These columns, starting with column AC onward, do not appear on phase 1. I add those after phase 1, and that's because I don't need the researchers to spend the time to get this information. The first thing we're doing is it a new record or not? So in the process of creating this database, we will sometimes run across a name that we see normally on a group grave that isn't in the Find a Grave or the Arlington records that we started with. If that's the case, we want to put a yes, like we have here for John Stroud, because we're adding him to the database. That's new. We want Arlington to be able to flag that when we get the information back to them and say, the database you gave us didn't have John Stroud. This is something that needs to be added. So that's why this is here. So you can put that there, or the state director can get that there. The state director will probably add your email address there. And then this column here that says grave type, there's a drop-down menu. Just indicate if it's an individual, a group, or a cenotaph grave. We want to have that information on a summary level, so that's why we're asking for that, but it should be easy to find as you're doing your story. The next one we want to have is the Together We Serve Honor Roll URL. So we want to be able to have that so there's a quick way for anybody that has the database to find the story on Together We Serve. If it's a Together We Serve version, we recognize that not all stories are saved for Together We Serve, so some of these may be blank. And we want the honor roll, not the profile page. The profile page is going to be behind a firewall, and you have to have access to that branch to be able to get to that page. So we want to use the URL from the Together We Serve honor roll is this reference right there. The next two things, home address and congressional district, go together. We're looking for a home address so we can identify a congressional district. And I'll talk about that a little bit more on another slide. But the main places you will probably be able to find a home address is in the census data. So if you have a 1940 census, great, or a 1930 census, you'll probably be able to identify where that person lived. And the last thing we want help with is with the NARA honor roll. And the reason we're looking for that is if they're on the NARA honor roll, then we have their information already, and those individuals that are helping us develop a database on a state level, they already have that name in their database. But if you run across a name that is not on the NARA honor roll, that means that for whatever reason, when those were put together at the end of World War II, they got missed. And so we want to be able to flag those when we finish each operation database. we're going to share it with the state directors, and they can sort by this particular column, and they may pick up some names of people they don't have on their database for their state. Here's an example of how you can find if someone is on the NARA honor roll. So if you go to Fold 3 and then you do a search by their service number, and then it'll show up World War II Army and Army Air Forces casualty list, or the Navy version of that. You don't actually have to click this to see it. If you just see this as a item in Fold 3, that tells you their name is on the honor roll. So let us know if the story that you've written, if the person is on the honor roll or not. The next thing I want to talk about is useful information for directors, and also for me. And I haven't been as clear in indicating how to use these columns in the past, so they're not going to be as consistent for the stories that we've already done. And I don't think at this point, unless you really want to, you need to go back and make any changes. But going forward, here's some things that to think about. So there's a column called Notes of Interest. There's a column called Comments. And there's also an entire tab called Comments for Director tab. Here's the Comments for Director tab. And we weren't using it when we were doing the Watchtower, so you don't see any in here. This is a good place to put the name of the person that you were writing about, who you are, what the comment you have if you need to give some feedback to the director, and then here's a place where they can respond back. So that's kind of expanded beyond what I had originally, was just a column called Comments, which I have right here. And there's another similar column called Notes of Interest, which I have right here. And I didn't give really good instructions on how to use those, so I'm doing that here. Notes of Interest, we want this to be fallen focused. So if this is something that you think is of interest more than normal, that Arlington may want to know about, or it might make for a good news story, because we'd like to get more attention to the fallen, and obviously the stories that are more unique get more attention. A note of interest might be, I was looking through a database the other day, and I came across the name Glenn Miller. So it's a common name, but those of you familiar with World War II know that Glenn Miller was a famous band leader, and he went down in a plane crash over the English Channel in December of 1944. Well, he has a cenotaph marker in Arlington. So if someone puts note of interest, Glenn Miller, the band leader, or something else, that would be something that we might want to focus on to get some media attention. So anything of interest related to the fallen, you could put something like his brother also died during the war, or his father served in World War I and is also buried in Arlington. Anything that's kind of stands out, that's kind of unique, that's related to the actual fallen would be a note of interest. And we don't need to have something like that on each story that you write, but if you do come across something that says, wow, this is really neat, you can share that in that Notes of Interest column. As far as comments, I think this is more process focused. So if you're going through the research and you realize there's two guys that have the exact same name, and I'm having a devil of a time figuring out which is which, that's process focused. So you could put a note in there that says, there's another guy with the exact same name, so be careful. The Comments tab is also a place where the Phase 1 crew may have shared some information for you as a writer to help you get started on. Another example of a comment that you might see that's process focused is maybe the person started off as an enlisted man, and then he ended up being a officer. So he's going to have two different service numbers. So you probably, if you're doing the research and doing some documentation, some of his records going to be under the enlisted service number, and the other one's going to be when he's an officer. So that's process focus. So comments related to that might be helpful. And as I shared, if you have any comments for the director, instead of putting in that comment box, use that comment tab, and our directors will look at those on a regular basis and be able to get back to you on some things you're finding. And I think it'll improve the effort for other people if you're finding something and other people read those comments in the directors tab and saying, oh, I got to look for that too. So that's what I wanted to share on those three sections of the database. So wrapping up here soon, the last thing I wanted to share is why are we doing this thing on congressional districts? We don't do this on any of the other databases, but the thought behind this is the Arlington National Cemetery is probably going to be the last national level project like this. After that, they're going to be more focused either on individual units or maybe a battle or a ship, but a lot of it's going to be at the state level. So it'll help our state level efforts if we get more engagement from those in leadership at the state level. Will we get all 535 congressional districts involved? Probably not, but we should be able to get a fraction of them. So this is how we're doing the congressional district piece on the database. So I'm going to use an example here of Edgar Barnes. And when I was doing the research for him and looking for his home address, he was in a rural section. So I just needed his home county. So I just put Hamlin in his home county. And then I went to a Google and I just Googled Kansas congressional districts. I ended up, there's more than one that'll show up, but this is the one that I found. And Hamlin County, I know, is in this section right here. So this is District 2. So once I know what the home address is, or in this case the home county, the next thing I would do is click on here, and from the drop-down box I'd be able to select where they're from. It's alphabetical by state and then the district number, and it's based on the 2020 version. The census that they've completed will change this, but it won't go into effect until after our project is done. Having this information, we'll be able during the summer when our project is completed to separate the database by fallen in congressional district, approach the offices of our congressmen and congresswomen and tell them, here are the 12 people or the 300 people or however many fallen whose address is now within their district we have a record of. So a lot of them, just because they're interested in topics like this, may be intrigued and look into it more. And we think some of them will say, hey, this is really great what we're doing. Because what we really need to do is we need to have a lot more state support so that projects like we have in the 14 states where we have activity can be developed. And so we can get more help in those states where we do have a presence to get more people to help write the stories. We want to get these done by September 2nd, 2025, the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. And if we take that more of a long view approach, we don't need hundreds and hundreds of people helping us at the state level most of the time. It's oftentimes in the low tens, 20 or 30. I don't think there's any state that needs more than like 40 people that was averaging one story a week until September of 2025. I think if we approach it this way, it'll help us grow the project so we can be done by the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. That's what I wanted to share in this video, and thanks again for your support. Without the writers that are writing these stories, we wouldn't be able to conclude this project for Arlington, and we are asking a little bit more of our writers related to databases than we have in the past, but I'm hoping this video has explained the reasons why we're doing this. Thank you.